Sexual violence is any form of unwanted violence or aggression in a relationship or otherwise.
I think to me personally, sexual violence can be various things. It's not necessarily physical, it can be emotional, it can be verbal. There are so many layers to this, but really I think we have to get out of that defined sexual violence as only one stream. It's only when one person is physically being abused or hurt. There are so many layers to it that perhaps we're not talking about. We're just kind of falling back on this old definition, but not looking at the various ways people can be affected by this.
In a criminal law context, sexual violence can take many forms. It could come in the role or the form of a threat, an act, a gesture. Criminal harassment in a sexual context, it takes many forms. It can arise out of a workplace context or a domestic relationship or a home context.
Sexual violence to me is power or control exerted over another person by one person or a group of people. And I think it really takes part, we have to look at our schools and our community and our families as well as workplaces and consider all of the different places that it can take part, because sometimes we just think of maybe a pub or a bar in terms of where it might be. So we have to look at all of the settings, and then we also have to consider that it takes many different forms. So something like saying a joke to somebody that has a sexual connotation or points out someone's sexual orientation, that can be a form of sexual violence. And I think that often we don't look at the full spectrum of what sexual violence can be. We think of rape as being sexual violence, but there's so many different activities across the spectrum.
Sexual violence is any unwanted act against somebody's sexual privacy. It can be not only physical, but verbal and emotional as well.
Sexual violence is an umbrella term that encompasses anything that violates a person's sexuality.
Okay, so I feel like it's a tricky term for sure. Sexual violence, I think, is when someone tries to aggress or exert power over someone else who, based on like sexual acts or innuendo or talk, and it can happen to any gender, and it's something that's kind of just present in our culture almost all the time. And so the message is really hard to pull apart of what's okay and what's not. And so I feel like we see sexual violence in our communities.
I think our community needs to take accountability for sexual violence as a community. It's not just blaming men or blaming women. This is a responsibility that we all have to take a hold of and be very, very honest about. There is, I think, a significant amount of shame that surrounds both victims and their families when it comes to sexual violence. So rather than dealing with the issue, talking about it honestly, it's something that for many years has been kind of swept under the rug. Well, we have to get rid of that rug. We have to talk about this openly and honestly and figure out some quantifiable solutions. It can't be, well, we'll just let that one person deal with this and their emotions and after effects of what has happened. No, we have to be preventative. We have to talk about this. We need to teach children from a young age, both male and female, that we are all a part of this. We can all be a part of the solution to reduce the amount of sexual violence and domestic violence that takes place in the community, but it has to be embraced by the community first.
In my world, in my field of work and my history, sexual violence doesn't discriminate against anybody, female, male, young, old, culture, race. It's a horrific experience for anybody to go through. And it's everywhere. No one is safe from it. And that's how I see it. And it's also about not being able to defend yourself regardless of your profession, regardless of what you know, how much you know, and how to keep yourself safe at the same time.
That support is available for you in a number of contexts. There are a lot of places that are there for support, whether it be counseling, whether it be police services, whether it be victim services. There's a lot of supports available.
Well, I think that as community members, we can better support victims of sexualized violence by understanding sexualized violence and the ramifications of it and the issues that surround it in a better way. I think that's actually should be something that we as members of our community should hold as something that is important for us to understand. And I think that as a community, to support those people, they're reaching out. They're wanting support, and why would we not, as a community, support them, regardless of who? And sometimes that's a factor. Sometimes it's because of who maybe the perpetrator may be, or and a lot of times victims of sexualized violence may reach out for support from people around them, but don't want to talk about or expose who the perpetrator is. And that should be okay too, because I think a lot of the times we as a community think that, well, if they don't want to go to the police or if they don't want to publicly announce this, then somehow it didn't happen, or maybe they're less than truthful. So I think that the idea is that we should be supporting the person because they are looking for our support, not because it's validated on any level whatsoever.
I think sexual violence is really complex, and I think a lot of times even professionals that work in the field, it's a difficult thing to wrap your head around. So because it's so complex, it requires complex solutions. So it can't just be one thing. So people have to collaborate and work together. There has to be education, like I said, from a very young age often to impact it. There has to be promotion and messages. We have to look at the technology that people use, and we have to look at all the different places that people find themselves. So everywhere from, where people work, where people play, where people get their education, and make sure that there's things happening in all of those settings, because if we do it in one place, it's not going to have the impact that we need to target something that can be so large.
I think it's important to look at organizations. I mean, we have Transition House, we have this wonderful project that you're doing. I think of this from my position as an elected official. I need to keep talking about this with my colleagues, making sure that this is an issue that is top of mind, that we're supporting the organizations, the initiatives, the departments that are helping with the education and the treatment of victims. It can't fall on volunteers, it can't fall as a responsibility of these organizations. We all have a part to play in this. So ensuring that we're all hearing the truth, we're all participating in finding solutions, we're all working together to keep the voices of victims loud and clear and heard is, I think, essential.
So I think we just need to be more open about having conversations. We need to not re-traumatize victims when they report and find some protection there. And I think we need to have more trauma-informed services to help people deal with not only the actual assault of sexual violence, but the aftermath of what comes with reporting it and talking about it and whether people believe you or not. And so I think we need more services that are aware of that and that aim to reduce that stigma and open the conversation.
As the executive director of Cape Breton Transition House, I think it's really important for everyone, for people to know and for our community to know that working with victims of sexualized violence has been something that we have done for the 34 years that we have been, or 36 years now that we've been in existence. And that very seldom do we work with a woman who hasn't been touched in some way by sexualized violence. And that in our community, in our province, the supports and the resources for people who are victims of sexualized violence still are lacking, and there's still huge gaps. And that, transition houses and women's centers in this province have been trying to bridge some of those gaps. But it's really important that all professions who touch sexualized violence take a very strong and active role in assisting the victims of sexual assault and sexual violence.
What I would like to say to anyone who has been a victim of sexual violence is that we know this is a very difficult time for you, and it's important for you to know that we're here to help.
It's important for victims and survivors to know that they're heard, that they're believed, that they're supported, and that there's supports available for them in our community.
You're loved. There are people here to support and help you. We have safe places that you can come to for assistance, that there is an effort by the community in terms of education on how to, like I said, engage in preventative measures that deal with the issue before it becomes an issue. That this is not something we're going to turn our backs on. We are here to help, we are here to educate, we are here to embrace, and I guess simply you're not alone in